morning, JD.
Good morning. How's it going?
Good. Good to see you.
It's good to see you too.
We've been sitting here. One of the behind-the-scenes things is we've been sitting here, and I tried to start talking to JD, and I was like, well, maybe I shouldn't talk to you very much yet because I didn't want to get into any of the stuff that we're going to be talking about. But I did want to get into it.
What'd you want to get into?
Well, I just wanted to see what you talked about on Sunday.
Yeah, so I talked about healing. I think, funny story, I was supposed to do teaching, but then I completely misread a text. So I did healing. So sometimes that just happens. So I did Jesus the Healer after last week. Pastor Nate did Jesus the Healer too. So if you're listening to this podcast or watching it out in Prescott, I apologize. Completely my fault that you got to Jesus the Healer, but you can never have enough healing. So
that's right. Yeah, so then that was our subject here too also.
Awesome.
Jesus the Healer. Yeah.
What did you guys talk about? Like, what passage did you decide to focus on?
Yeah, so that's a great question. I actually focused on a lot of passages. I kind of started off and talked about how sometimes a sermon is like making a recipe. You kind of mix this ingredient and that ingredient, and it just seems random, but it kind of comes out in the end. So, but I talked a little bit about how in the book of Revelation, how God is going to make everything new, and how really our healing, our ultimate healing, is not in this world, and it's at the end of time rather than now. Because as I mentioned last week on our podcast, Jesus the Healer, everybody that Jesus ever healed ended up dying.
Yeah.
In the end,
They weren't fully healed.
Right. They're not healed in this time, but that's kind of where I started, and then I bounced a lot of places and talked a lot about how Jesus was moved with compassion. So he would heal somebody, but it's just so common, moved with compassion, and then he would touch them and heal them or something like that. It was kind of a.
And why do you think that that's important, that Jesus was moved with compassion, that he didn't just heal, but like, what did you draw out of that?
Yeah, so I kind of built up the fact that Jesus was human, and we're moved with compassion because we're human, and we can understand what the other person is thinking. We can put ourselves in their shoes. So we have sympathy and we have empathy, and then the next step is compassion. And so when you get to compassion, and those aren't my original thoughts. I mean, those pretty common thoughts. Erwin McManus has a book out right now where he talks about that a little bit. I used a quote from his book, and but anyway, just the fact that when Jesus healed somebody, it wasn't pity for the person; it was compassion. It was a lot. He was drawn into that, and that has to do with his humanity.
Yeah, I think that's 100%, because 2 weeks ago, I talked about something similar in Jesus the Man, and I forgot the Bible passage, but it was talking about Jesus had sympathy, and then I did a dive when I was doing my exegetical research that all of the Greek gods at the time, or the Roman gods, the gods that the people of that time worshiped, the number one characteristics was apathy, which they don't have compassion for the humans. And that's like the typical characteristic of the Greek gods, right? They just do whatever they want. Yeah. They're powerful, just like the Jewish God was, but they don't care. They don't give a rip about, human beings. And so that was the main religion at that time, because all of the Jews, all of Israel was Hellenized, they were occupied by their Roman overlords. And so to have a God that shows sympathy, the exact opposite of what the prevailing concept of God was just incredibly cool. And and it ties into the healing, because it's a complete, that Jesus knows how we feel and heals us. He doesn't just, I don't care, boom, you're healed.
Right. Yeah. Right. Yeah, right, because God had to be human to have sympathy, to understand us in that way. Yeah, because I talked a little bit about how the pillar of smoke, God was this pillar of smoke that the Israelites followed out of Egypt, and the pillar of fire at night, and how a pillar of smoke doesn't feel pain.
Yeah.
And a pillar of fire, and so, but Jesus, on the other hand, he felt pain and knew exactly what it was like. He could empathize with us, and oftentimes we don't allow our hearts to get to the point of empathy, and and to actually be a part of healing like he was doing, we have to allow our heart to go deeper.
To be softened like
Yeah.
that. I think it's sort of, and I know we're sort of going on a tangent, but healing really does speak to the characteristic of God, because you bringing up the pillar of smoke, it's God has sort of these dual characteristics of fear of the all-powerful God that we must worship and be fearful of, but then also our God, the friend who has empathy on us, who knows how we feel, that we can draw near to and be comforted by. So it's these beautiful dual characteristics. It's funny because Megan and I were talking about this in the car yesterday, because we don't have kids, but we were talking about our upbringings and talking about, like, when we do want to have kids, what are we going to be like? And that it's so absolutely essential, because there's tons of parents, you see the parents that have empathy for their kids. They know how they feel, they're really kind to them, but they don't strike the fear into them. There's no respect then, there's no authority. And then, the parents that are all about authority and respect, but then there's no love, there's no empathy, there's no grace there. And so it's sort of like this dual characteristic of God, that sort of exists like this, and it's a beautiful thing.
Yeah.
In the personhood of Jesus is where they combine and become one.
Yeah, absolutely. So what do you talked about healing?
So I talked about, my sermon was really, really impacted and shaped actually by my conversations with my grandfather.
Okay.
So he is a theologian. To give you a little background on him, he was a missionary, a pastor. He's, been doing ministry absolutely his entire life. And I'm really, really close with him. Recently, he's been diagnosed with Parkinson's disease. And so he had books. He had several things that he wanted to work on. But because of that diagnosis, he wasn't able to work on it. So I was honored. He asked me to work on those things with him.
Right.
What we've been working on, we worked on one book on spiritual disciplines, which actually sort of informed my sermons in January for that Sacred Space series. But the one that we're working on right now, or that we were working on, it's sort of on hold, but that we were working on, that's so important to him, is on healing.
Oh, wow.
Is that he cares so much about healing and has all of these beautiful things to say. And so my whole sermon was pretty much framed by my conversations with him. Yeah. Because why should I share what I think about healing when I can talk with this pillar of faith, who's been thinking and praying about healing for so much longer and has showed it. And so what I talked about, what he defines healing as, is that healing is narrative, healing is relational, and healing is incarnational. And so what I did is we looked at the story in John 9, where there's a blind man and Jesus and the disciples are walking by. And the disciples say, hey, who sinned, this man or his parents? And Jesus said, well, actually, neither of them did. And then Jesus spits on the ground. He spits. He picks up the mud from his spit, and then he wipes it on the dude's eyes. And then he says, go wash. And then the guy's healed. And then the guy goes before the Pharisees, and the Pharisees are like, how did this happen? Like, what happened? He said, I don't know. All I know is that he spit, and then he wiped it on my eyes, and now I'm healed. And then the Pharisees are looking for these theological answers. They're like, did he do this? Did he do this? Is he this? Is he this? And he says, and the man just says, I don't know. I don't know if he's a sinner or not. I don't know. Right. All I know is that I was blind, but now I see. He's like, all I know is that I experienced this healing. And then at the end of the story, so it's like a really long passage, and I wanted to cram it all in, so I cut out a few parts, but I was up there reading the passage for a long time. But it's important because at the end of the story, Jesus and the man are united, and Jesus says, do you believe in the Son of Man? And the word for believe, and this is something I've brought up many times at Skyrocket Church, the word for belief in the Greek is pisteo. When we read the word believe, we think of something intellectual, because post-enlightenment, we think, in logic, and belief is this, I believe this, like, do you believe aliens are real? Yes, no, it's completely intellectual. But that Greek word back then, pisteo, it's more like pledging allegiance. It's more like pledging your loyalty. It's more like trusting. Because back then, nobody was an atheist. Everyone believed in God. It was, which of the gods do you pledge your allegiance to? Do you trust? Whose camp are you in? And so that's something that, so that's sort of a little side note. Whenever you read that word believe in the New Testament, that's what it means. It does mean believe, but it more so means trust, pledge yourself to. And so Jesus says, do you trust? Do you pledge yourself to the Son of Man? He says, I don't know who the Son of Man is. Who is he? And Jesus says, it's me. And then he says, I trust you and I worship you. And so that's sort
So
of,
he confessed his belief in him
he
by
did.
saying,
Yes.
yeah,
He confessed. He's like, okay, I trust you. You are my God. He's like pledging himself to Jesus right there at the end of the story.
right.
And so that's how it all wrapped up. But yeah, over the sermon, I sort of talked about the narrative aspect of healing. Do you want me to get into it? I'll just give Spark Notes.
Let's
So
go there.
the narrative.
But wait.
Yeah.
Before you go there, you introduced the whole concept of believing in aliens.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
100% believe in aliens. I think they exist.
Yeah. Oh, great.
What about you? What do you think?
I think God is a big creator, and I don't know that they've ever visited planet Earth, but hey, there's a lot of planets out there. And
Exactly.
if God could make us, why couldn't he make anything else he wanted and put it out there somewhere?
Yeah. And have you seen that YouTube video that it like shows the size of the Earth and then it zooms out and shows the size of the sun, the size of the galaxy, have you seen that YouTube video?
I don't know that
I don't even know what it's called, but if you just look up like size of the universe, zoom out or something on YouTube, it's absolutely incredible. And once I saw that, I mean, that's not what did it for me for aliens, but it sort of did in the sense that like, yeah, our God is definitely a creative God. He didn't just create this microcosm. He created this vast universe.
Yeah, right.
There's got to be life.
Yeah.
That's what I think.
I didn't mean to go there, but you brought it up. So, yeah.
I did. Aliens,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay, good.
Narrative. So I talked about the fact that the man, before Jesus heals him, the man does nothing. The man doesn't ask for healing. He's not a Jew. He's not a Christian. He doesn't, ask for forgiveness. The man is just there, and then Jesus heals him.
Yeah.
And so what I sort of dug into there is that healing is narrative in the sense that a lot of times we think we have to do something and then we're healed. But that's just not how it works in Scripture. And so you could say, well, JD, you're just looking at this story. Every single story of healing in the Bible, almost every story, Jesus makes the first action. He makes the first step. So we could also go to Mark 2, the paraplegic that's being lowered down from the ceiling. The man that Jesus heals, the paraplegic, doesn't do anything. He doesn't ask Jesus for healing. He doesn't ask him for forgiveness. Jesus just heals him. And so what does that mean that healing is narrative? Well, what it means is that healing is a part of our stories. And I actually sort of touched on what you did in the sense that healing is not final. All these people died.
Yeah.
Right? So it's not like when Jesus touches our lives, we experience full healing. It's the beginning of healing in our stories that culminates after the resurrection into full healing.
Yeah.
And so there's so many aspects of healing, and it's not just physical, that once we encounter Jesus, that we are continually being healed until that full healing. And I also pointed to the fact that Jesus is often working and healing in people's lives that don't even realize it. Like this man, he didn't know that Jesus was going to heal him. And I am a firm believer in that. And, that's one of the core tenets of Blue Mountain Community Church, of Skyrocket Church, that we believe God is working in the hearts of every single man, woman, and child, drawing them closer to him. And so that relates to healing in the sense that God is working his healing work in people. And it's our job as witnesses, as evangelists, to call that out, to point out God's story in your life, God's story in everyone else's life. And like the man, we don't have to convince people. People will grill us. Like the Pharisees, like, well, how did he heal? He's not a good guy. He's a sinner because he did it on the Sabbath. All these things. But he said, look, I don't know. It's not our job to, be lawyers for Jesus. Jesus can prove himself. We just say, I don't know. All I know is that I was broken. I felt lonely. I felt all these ways, and I experienced Jesus' healing. All I know is I was blind, but now I see. Yeah. And so that's narrative. The second thing is relational. Is that we have 4 relationships: our relationship with God, others, self, and nature. And I talked about how sort of in the Garden of Eden and all of those existed, and then they were broken by sin. And what healing is it heals all 4 of those relationships. So it's not just a physical healing of the body, but it's a healing of all of our relationships. Because the interesting thing is in the story of the blind man, we think, oh, he's just blind, that's it. But back then, when you were blind, you were actually cast out of your family. You were cast out of the church. Because in Leviticus, I think it's 19. I could pull it up on my sermon, but it's either 19 or 20. In Leviticus 19 or 20, it says that if you are blind or if you are lame or if you have a mutilated limb, you are unclean. In being unclean in the Jewish religion, what that meant is if you were unclean, you couldn't go to church. right? You could not offer a sacrifice to God. You had to go through these ritual ceremonies to become clean. So it's like there were these two sectors of the population. You were either clean or unclean. And if you were unclean, you had to get clean.
And you couldn't get clean if you're sick.
Exactly.
I mean, in some way.
How could you not? If you're unclean when you're blind, you can't just not be blind,
right?
right? Exactly what you said. And so this guy, he wasn't just physically deformed. He was dirty in the eyes of God, according to Jewish religion. He was not good enough. And so his relationship with God was permanently broken, as well as his family, because if you came into contact with someone who's unclean, you yourself became unclean too. And
But you could purify yourself.
exactly. Yeah. But what would normally happen is they would be cast out of the home, so lepers would be cast out of the home to go to a leper colony. If you were blind or lame, you would be relegated to begging. You normally wouldn't live with your family. And so Jesus healing this man didn't just heal his body, it healed his religious relationship with God, because then he became clean before God. Although deep down, I think Jesus is just breaking that whole system up.
Yeah.
But anyways, so his relationship with God is restored. His relationship with his family is restored because he can be with them again. With his self is restored because he can see. And then his relationship with nature, because now he can work. Because when you were blind back then, you couldn't work. And that's one of the things that I believe we're all made for, is working in nature. Not all of us are farmers, but we're all meant to work. It's a part of, interacting with the world.
Yeah.
And so now he can work and he doesn't have to beg anymore. And so anyways, that's the relational aspect of healing. And then the last aspect is incarnational, just the fact that Jesus is a human being, that he was here. He didn't just point and poof and heal. He was human and he touched the man. Yeah. So he touched the man before he healed him. And that's
you
sort of
wouldn't touch somebody who's unclean. Right?
Exactly. Because when Jesus, in touching the man, Jesus became unclean himself. And that's sort of what I left it on, is a lot of us have things that we feel unclean about, that we're shameful of, that we're ashamed of, that we feel guilty about. And Jesus touches us in the midst of that. He doesn't heal us and then come to us. He touches us while we are feeling that way. And then our healing narrative process, begins. And not all of us get healed boom instantly. Sometimes it's slower. I've never been miraculously healed. My grandfather, he's not being miraculously healed right now. But he's in that process of healing. And so, that incarnational aspect of Jesus reaching out and touching us where we're at in our pit of sin. He reaches his hand down first before we reach our hand up. And then that's the beauty. It really relates back to Jesus, the man. So I'm being long-winded, but that's the sermon sort of in 5 minutes, right there.
Yeah, that was more than 5 minutes.
It was more than 5 minutes.
How long? Okay, no, that was great. It was really helpful. Yeah, thanks. How long do you preach usually? I mean, because that's a lot of stuff.
I normally preach 20 to 23 minutes.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Can you guess? This sermon was a little bit longer.
This is 24 minutes right here.
This sermon was longer. I think I checked my clock. So I apologize for all of you listening to the podcast. You're getting a double dose of the sermon. I think I checked my clock and it was like 10:55 because we start church at 10. I was like, shoot. Because I always try to be done. I try to have us be done by 10:45 or 10:50. But I think I'm a little passionate about this subject.
Yeah.
So.
No, that's super. So it was funny as I was teaching Sunday. What you don't know, well, maybe you do know. I don't know if you know, but we have kind of a key word. Like I'll say something, and our band will hear that, and that's their message. Now, okay, we're supposed to go back up on the stage, and because it's time to end the service, the sermon anyway, and I hit the key word. And they got up, and I was like, shoot, I missed, there's this other passage that I wanted to cover, and I wanted to talk about, this young boy who had died, and Jesus comes up to him, and the widow or the mother is weeping, and Jesus puts his hand on the casket and calls this boy back to life. I mean, it's just this incredible scene. It's in Luke chapter 7. In the village of Nain. Anyway, but I had accidentally said the word and called them up, and so I totally skipped that piece of it.
So what did you do? Were they all just started standing up there for a while?
No, I didn't. I was just like, okay, if I skipped it, I skipped it. So I mean, I just.
Oh, so you skipped? Well, tell it now. Well, you skipped it.
It's just this. Yeah, I don't want to preach it, but what I do, let's go. You just did, right? No, what I do want to do though is I wanted to ask you a question. Have you ever I mean, we don't see a lot of physical healing
Yeah.
in terms of like divine healing. We do see a lot of physical healing with medication or therapy or whatever like that. But what do you suppose that's about? I mean, because we see it a lot in Scripture. Some places, especially third world nations, it seems like it's a much more common thing to experience. Why do you suppose physical healing? I'm not talking about relational healing or maybe narrative healing, but the physical healing.
Just straight up instantaneous physical
Yeah.
healing.
Why do you think we don't see as much of that here today?
I don't know. And that's one of the frustrating things for me in Scripture is it's very obvious that it's everywhere in Scripture, and it's just not here today. And I've heard many answers. Some people say, well, faith isn't as strong today, as it was back then. But I read stories in Scriptures of people with really weak faith back then, back then, and healing still happens. And my conception of healing is that God brings the healing, that it's not really us doing the work, it's God doing the work. So it's frustrating to me. I don't know.
Yeah.
What do you think?
What do I think? I think God meets us in the way we need Him to meet us, and in a lot of ways, we have a bit of an advantage. I mean, we've got churches everywhere. We've got podcasts. We've got books. We've got, I mean, you name it. We have access to all of these things, and so God's healing in our lives is really this eternal healing. It's not the instant physical healing that we feel like that's our biggest need. But God meets that need. And oftentimes I think, especially in third world nations and stuff like that, they don't have access to the same stuff we do. Although it's changing, I think, as time goes by. It seems like everybody has a cell phone.
Yeah.
Even in a small village where you wouldn't even think you'd find electricity, people have cell phones. And if you have a cell phone, you have access to all that stuff. But I think God, in His meeting us the way we need Him to, I think sometimes it just plays itself out differently. And so in divine healing, it's not that He doesn't do it here. I've seen it a couple times, but only a couple times in all my years. And
I took a great class in seminary. I forget what it's called, but it was all about like healing, levitation, meditation,
Levitation.
flying. No, seriously, because
Wow.
it's stuff that like in the history of the church has happened a lot. Like when you look at, I think it's like the early 1100s, 1200s, is monks would levitate, if they prayed a really long time. Of all of these different, it's like all of these different supernatural events of ghosts, right? Like over 50% of people have seen a ghost. Anyways, but it was looking at like the studies and the scientific stuff of it. But there is really compelling evidence out there for physical healing.
Yeah.
And I can't quote it off the top of my head, but there's compelling evidence from certain areas, like back in the Bible, certain pools where people would get in and then get out, and that scientists have literally observed wounds being healed in front of their very eyes that completely defies scientific explanation. I 100%, I think that because I've seen the proof, I just don't have it. It would be great to dig it up and put it like in the footnotes of this podcast. I 100% do believe that supernatural healing happens. It happens, but it just doesn't happen as much as I'd like it to. Right. I guess that's what I'm trying to say, is that it seems like, it happens all the time in the Bible, and it just hardly ever happens here.
Yeah.
I guess that's my stance, what I'm frustrated about. But I 100% do acknowledge that it does happen, just not very often at all.
Yeah. Yeah, right. I think it's interesting too when we read about Jesus at the pool of Bethesda. He comes up to a man who's been laying there for 38 years, something like that. And is that right?
I don't know.
It was something like that. It was a long time. Anyway, so he's laying there, and Jesus asks him if he wants to be healed, and he heals him. But the other thing is, everybody else at that pool was also in need of healing, but for some reason Jesus walked past all of them, heals this man, and then leaves. And it's like all these other people also needed that same touch, or maybe they didn't need it as much as this guy did. I don't know, but
I think they did. I don't know. I think it's okay to be frustrated with it, because for every person that's healed, there's 10 people who aren't healed.
Yeah.
I have had family members who we've prayed over and over, God, please heal them, and they aren't healed and they pass away. And so I think trying to make logical sense of it is disrespectful to the people that God hasn't healed, because just like you said, there's people here at the pool of Bethesda that God didn't heal, right?
Yeah.
That Jesus didn't heal. And what's going on there? I don't know.
Yeah. I told a story Sunday, and I've told it several times really in the 11 years I've been here. But I told a story Sunday of a man, a friend of ours, who was healed of cancer. He was on his deathbed, and they didn't expect him to make it through the night. He was healed of cancer, and then he ended up dying 10 years later. And he was healed and used those 10 years that he had in an incredible way. But then humanity, we live under this curse of Adam, and we're mortal, and we'll die, and yeah, so our healing, our real healing is yet to come. But we, as according to my sermon, which was Sunday, but we can join that healing process in that we can also be moved with compassion. And I might not be able to, unless God gave me suddenly the authority to heal somebody right in that moment, I might not be able to heal you, but I can sit with you and have compassion with you. And there's a healing element even in that, in human compassion, because human compassion comes from God. I mean, yeah.
And we have to, at least the way that I've come to terms with it, we have to have faith that full healing happens eventually for everyone.
Yeah.
It's just some healing might happen now in this life, and some healing might happen once we see Jesus face to face. Here's an interesting question I have for you. So you said God gives you the authority to heal.
Yeah.
What does that mean?
That's a great question.
Because like Jesus gives the authority to the disciples to heal and to cast out demons.
Yeah.
I mean, what does that?
I mean, we can't really do anything with anything spiritual.
Yeah.
I shouldn't say that. We can do all kinds of spiritual things.
I guess what I'm saying is, if God gave you the authority to heal, could you go and choose who gets healed? Or is it more so that like it's predestined for one person to be healed, and then you're the person that do you sort of get what I'm saying?
Yeah,
like
I think I do. I think it's a little bit of both. I mean, I think if God gave you the authority, here's the way I look at it. I'll be with somebody, and I will, as they've asked me to pray for them, I'll pray, but I'll listen to what I feel like the Spirit is telling me. And sometimes I'll pray for their healing, and sometimes I'll pray for something else. But if you have the authority to heal somebody in that moment, God will say, okay, pray for it. Just pull it out and let it rip. But, I think to pray for somebody's healing and it's not God's will, then that's not going to happen. And we shouldn't even go there if that's not God's will.
I had a colleague in seminary whose parents were missionaries in Thailand. And what they said, because they experienced a lot of supernatural healing, but they said there is a very sharp distinction between magic and God's healing, biblical healing. And what magic is you are in control. Yeah. So you are healing the person. You get to decide who gets healed. Biblical healing is allowing God to work through you. And sometimes God decides to heal and sometimes he doesn't. That's not a question we can answer. Right. And you and I were talking when Justin was changing the film. We both have experienced a lot of Christians who they don't know it, but they believe in magic.
Yeah,
absolutely. I've had people expect me to be able to heal people, who expect me to pray and do the supernatural healing. Well, that's magic. That's me being in control of something. And if God ever does work healing through me, it's not going to be because of me, my control.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. Magic.
What's your story? You're starting to tell it.
I was telling you a story while we were changing the camera. I was telling about how in college, I had a friend who came back from a church service one night, and he came in and he expressed, he's like, I've been healed at church. And we're like, well, what happened? And he said, I didn't know it, but one of my legs was longer than the other. And he went up and sat down, and the pastor took his feet and kind of did this. And now his legs are both the same length. And we're like, your legs are the same. I mean, it's like there was nothing wrong with your legs. But anyway, but this pastor convinced him that God had healed his legs, and one was longer than the other. It was a magic trick is what it was. And we're laughing, but it's tragic. I mean, I think
it is tragic. If you go on YouTube and you Google televangelist healing fails.
Oh, yeah.
That's something I did. It happens all the time. Like, this is a whole scope, the whole segment of Christianity where, healing is almost turned into a commodity, where it's like the pastor can heal no matter what because the pastor has faith, and then the healing. And there's videos of, they're funny, of the pastor going up and touching someone's shoulder and the person, oh, I'm finally healed. Oh, and then the pastor walks away and then the person's like, not actually healed, but it's made to be a product. When healing is turned into a, ooh, rah, rah, come to church, the pastor will heal you because the pastor has the power. It's just a complete, that's not biblical healing at all. That's magic.
Because the focus is not on not on God, not on Jesus. The focus is on the pastor and on the gift. It's not on the other, what it's supposed to be about.
Yeah. And not being healed should not affect our faith. And that's hard to say, and that's easy to say. But what if God doesn't heal though? Not being healed should not affect our faith and trust in God.
But it does.
Yeah.
Yeah, it does affect us because we think, a lot of times we think, I wasn't healed. Maybe I don't have good enough. Maybe I need a deeper faith, or maybe there's a secret sin. In fact, that's one of the things I've heard a lot of over the years. Maybe there's something that he was doing that he just won't confess still. And if he just confessed that sin, God would heal him or something like that. Whereas there might be nothing at all, and yet God just chose not to heal. Yeah. And that's also tragic because it's abusive in some ways, because if God chooses to heal you, that's beautiful. And if he chooses not to, maybe that's beautiful. So,
yeah. And it's harder to have faith when God doesn't heal. And that's why I'm just going back to, it's just so important. We have to maintain that trust in God. We have to trust that God will heal everybody fully one day. It's just some people he's going to heal temporarily now.
Yeah. And
other people he's going to wait to heal fully later. But I've experienced people, exact same story, and they're driven away from the church, because, they're a sinner and that's why they didn't get healed. And it drives people away from the church, and it's flat out not true.
Right.
If you've experienced that, it's a lie. If you haven't experienced healing, that doesn't mean that you're more sinful. It doesn't mean any of that. I don't have an explanation for it, but I just know that that's a lie.
Well, and the other thing that might be going on is the healing that you really need is, you might think, hey, this is what I need healed, but your real healing might be something totally different. It might be a relational thing. It might be, I don't know. I mean, I'm making up stuff now, but God heals us, but he heals our deepest needs. And he knows our deepest needs. So, yeah.
As we wrap up, what's one thing that you would want listeners, both the sermon and the podcast, to take away about healing?
Yeah. Oh man, that's
sorry. That's really, that's a question out of left field.
Yeah, it's a little bit hard. But I would say, the one thing is that God loves you, and your healing will come. I mean, it's a promise. But you're gonna die. That sounds awful, but I mean, we're mortal, and our healing is at the resurrection when Jesus, or when God will make everything new, and so that's healing. That's when there will be no more crying, no more pain. That is the day that we all look forward to, and so whether you're healed on earth or not. I pray for you, and I will pray for you for your physical healing and for your relational healing and for all of those things, because those are so important to us. But our true healing is at the end of all things. So, what about you?
I mean, that's what I would say. It's just that, it doesn't make sense who God heals, who he doesn't, because Jesus passed a lot of blind men. It was next to a lot of people at the pool of Bethesda. I'm struggling to say that. And it doesn't mean that he loved one person more than the other. And Jesus flat out said it's not whether this man sinned or not. So it has nothing to do with you.
Right.
So
That's
if you feel that guilt and shame of not being healed, let that be released. It has nothing to do with how good of a person you are. We don't really have an explanation for that, because Jesus even says it's just so that God's power may be revealed.
Right.
So we don't know why, but that's why, at least for me, who struggle, when I see family members who are sick, who have died and have not had their requests for healing answered, I struggle with it, and it hurts. And exactly what you said. I just have to hold on to the fact. I have to trust that full healing will come one day. Because if not, yeah, and it's morbid, but it's true. We all die. And so we have to live with a sense of that death in our minds, because after that is where that full healing will come. So,
and sometimes people, when you really think about the fact that we're mortal, in some ways, maybe that's a blessing in that it causes us to really focus on the brevity of life and what's most important. Because if we went on for thousands upon thousands of years, we might not even get to dealing with our business.
Yeah.
And a lot of people never do deal with their business anyway. But well, anyway, anything else? Hey, thanks for joining us. It's been great. Do we have like a little jingle that we can play for everybody?
I heard you singing a song before we started.
I don't remember. He's lying. He's lying. All right. Hey, thanks. We'll catch you next week, and Monday Matters.
Monday night.